Right. Hello and welcome to everyone who is joining us today. We are very excited to have Danielle, Joanna, and Jenn here today from Beyond Behavior. Danielle is going to be presenting to us about the leisure and independent living skills, which is a very important topic. So we're really grateful to have you here. Just a note to all the participants, if you have any questions during the webinar, you can just type your questions in the chat box. I will be keeping track of those questions, and at the very end, we will make sure that all your questions have been answered. So go ahead, Danielle.
Thank you. So I am Danielle, and I'm a co-owner of Beyond Behavior Consulting. So I chose this topic in particular because, I mean, when you talk to a BCBA, you hear about applied behavior analysis. There's a lot of talk about behavior and behavior reduction, and how to reinforce, and all of the things that we talk about with ABA. But we have to remember that behavior reduction is often the easy part. It's everything beyond that gets a little bit trickier. So we're going to start with leisure and independent living skills. So first off, we're going to talk about what exactly leisure skills and ADLs are. So basically, just from Wikipedia, a leisure skill is an activity or hobby that a child can default to whenever he or she has downtime. They serve to help unwind, relax, and enjoy. So some example that our kids might do for a leisure skill is color, read, build with Legos, play video games, shoot basketball hoops, play soccer, anything like that. And then activities of daily living are activities that are performed throughout the day that allow a child to gain independence in his or her environment. So some examples of that are dressing, toileting, toothbrushing, feeding. Very, very, very important skills. I'm going to refer to them. You'll hear me say ADLs a lot during the thing. So if you're wondering what that is, that's just activities of daily living. Okay, so then we want to get into why are independent living skills important for your child and your family. We have to really remember they're not only important for your child, it's for your family dynamic as a whole. When children acquire independent living skills, they can navigate daily tasks successfully, participate in social experiences, and prepare for necessary activities required for education and work. So if children aren't independent, they're not going to see as much success as the children who are, or they're prepared. Then also when children acquire independent living skills, families have more time to get things done like laundry and dishes, and then you guys can participate in more meaningful family activities. If you're spending 90% of your day getting your child ready, getting his shoes on, getting his coat on, just to get out the door might take 25 minutes, whereas if we take the time to teach some of these ADLs, it'll be a lot quicker, and you can have more time to go out and enjoy, go to the park, go to a pool. And then in the same sense with the leisure skills, when you have to be home and you have to do, the laundry, or you need to do dishes, making sure that your child is engaging, hopefully doing something that they enjoy so that you can get things done.
Sometimes we also fall into a rut. I think this is an area that a lot of times is missed over in programming for a while. And it, at least in my experience, it doesn't start to seem important until a child's already older. And now the parents are, really concerned that they're not able to put on their own socks and shoes. They're not able to kind of zipper and get changed and do these things. But sometimes it doesn't really set in until you're looking at, a preteen. But it's important that you start to program for this. So as behavior analysts, we program for this at a young age. And sometimes parents kind of are taken back if we don't explain, like, hey, it's important, we're pushing this. Because what happens is time goes by, and we all know what it's like to be a parent. Oh, it's just easier to get them out the door and get them going, right? And it's not always about every single time. Sometimes you are in a rush and have to do that. But those times when you're not in a rush and you remember your behavior analyst saying, hey, they're working on putting on their shoes, that's that moment to capture that now when they're young and have the time to acquire the skill instead of waiting until they're older. And then it really hits you like, wow, they're lacking these skills. So I think just an experience, it's something that kind of goes by and isn't highlighted until they're older, but it's something you really want to be thinking about at a young age for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then the last point is, we have to remember that independent living skills connect us to our family and community. If your child is more independent, it gives you so many more options to go to social events, to maybe go to a friend's house, even just to go out in the community. It just opens so many doors to be able to do a whole lot more with your family, with your kids. So like Jen said, it's very, very important to start programming for that early. Joanna, did you want to say something?
No, I was just throwing in there out for dinner, because that's the complaint I see all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can't go to a restaurant.
Yep. Okay, so leisure skills. When you're building leisure skills into your child's repertoire, this kind of Jen just hit on this point. Why we might ask, why do I need to teach my 3-year-old to entertain himself? He's only 3, he's fine. But we have to remember the big picture, that they're not always going to be 3. And when you're busy or dad's busy and you need to get something done, what is your child going to do? We know that children with autism, without having leisure skills, they're gonna, they might engage in stereotypy, spin around, climb tables, pace back and forth, jump on the couches, watch the same video clip over and over. And then it also might lead to SIB, aggression, a whole slew of other issues that, if we can just teach basic enjoyment out of alternative items and things to do, then it could just decrease these behaviors. And then we also have to remember that as children with autism grow older, we may also see that their interests without intervention become more and more restricted and repetitive. So we need to make sure that we intervene early and quickly so that we can open their world up to see and enjoy all the things that there are out there. Because if we don't, they might just stay very, very restricted.
And we see that a lot in practicing. They may have enjoyed this when they were younger, but now they're solely, the only thing that I can do is give them the iPad to get things done, or I have to watch them, be with them 24/7, right? And that's a skill deficit in leisure skills. And that's so important for any human or parent to be able to get anything done, is that, you can't be with your child 24/7 on top of them. So leisure skills is something too, I think that's highly overmissed in programming and is so important, because again, it's one of those things that it's not so much an issue when they're younger, and then it becomes, oh man, my child's older now, I need to get things done, and I still have to be monitoring them 24/7, so it's a huge area that I think is very important to focus on.
So then now onto a little bit of activities of daily living. So when building ADLs into your child's repertoire, we want to focus on skills that are functional for you, for your child and family. So what's going to make your family dynamic better? What's going to make your day and your child's day go more smoothly? So think about that. We want to focus on skills that will allow for independence while at school, in the community, and at work if they're at that age. So we want to make sure that they can feed themselves, they could put on their socks and shoes, put on a coat, wash their hands, pack a book bag, things like that. And then we also, this is huge, Jen, Joanna, and I, we talk about this all the time. We need to focus on skills that will ensure your child remains safe when you can't be there. So that includes toileting, showering, dressing. These are private events, we want to keep them private. So, we want to make sure that your child, when out in the community at a summer camp or something, ideally we want them to go to the bathroom on their own. We don't want a stranger peeking in to make sure that they're okay. So we want to make sure that they have these skills and they can be done independently.
Yeah, this is a huge protective factor for sure. It really is, to being able, these private events that they can do independently, there's no reason for an adult to be in there with them then at that time. So, this out of everything is probably one of the most safest things you can teach early, so that they can be as independent during those times as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we need to understand when we're teaching independent living skills, most typically developing children will learn these skills naturally by watching others and imitating their behavior. So if your typically developing child might see mom put on a coat and put on a coat, and there's no teaching opportunity. We don't really have to, break a step down from 1 through 5. This is how you put on a coat, because they learn by imitating. However, children with autism may not want to learn these skills. A child with autism probably doesn't care that I'm putting on my coat, and they don't want to imitate me, and they don't want to put on the coat like mommy does. The other issue is that children with autism might not care what other kids think. If there's a 5-year-old going into kindergarten typically developing and they're not toilet trained, and they see that all the other kids in the class are toilet trained, they're probably going to want to be toilet trained. They're not going to want to be in a diaper. Whereas our kids with autism, they don't see that. They don't see it as anything different. So that's kind of what we really need to understand. And then in order to help a child with autism see the intrinsic value of independent living, we must teach them extrinsically first. So like I said, a typical child sees value in these skills intrinsically, where our kids on the spectrum might not. Anything else? So before we start to teach these skills, teaching independent living skills to your child with autism, it won't be easy. It definitely won't be easy. We might run into some competing behaviors that include, stereotypy, aggression, SIB, resistance to change, or resistance to trying new things. What you might think, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, sometimes sensory issues really play a role here too, especially if it's, revolves around water and things like that. Sometimes you have to just get over those hurdles as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, what you might think might be enjoyable for your child doesn't mean that they will agree. You might think that they're going to like something. Well, why wouldn't you like water play? Water play is awesome. We have to kind of really assess that and make sure that we're picking things that your child's going to like. And you also need to backtrack and teach foundational skills that will help with the process. So you can't just go in and teach a leisure skill if there's no other skills there. So if they don't have basic imitation skills, if your child doesn't understand, that a consequence leads to, or an action leads to a consequence. So if you do this, then you get that. Or if there's no tolerance to touch and physical prompting, because, some ADLs are difficult, and you might actually have to go in, and we typically do most to least prompting with a new skill. Where you're hand over hand and then you're fading out. But if they can't tolerate the touch, then, that's not an option. So we want to make sure that they have the prerequisite skills to complete activities before introducing them. So say if it's a puzzle, but a child doesn't have the ability to scan, we need to make sure that, they can scan in a bigger array if we're going to introduce a puzzle of 8 pieces, or make sure that they could pick up pieces. If they don't have the fine motor skills to pick up a puzzle piece, then we have to teach that first. So there's a lot of thought that would go into this, and your behavior analysts, your teachers will all support with that. All right, so I'm going to start with the leisure skills, some interventions, tips, and strategies for leisure skill, and then move on to ADLs. So it is important to remember that part of the definition of leisure skills is done for enjoyment. So we're not forcing kids to like something that they don't like. Not by any means. We're just trying to get them to open up their world and see that there are other things that they may enjoy. So the key deficits of autism that may restrict enjoyment of leisure activities are the persistent limitations in communication. So for example, they might have a limited ability to ask for a leisure activity. They might want something, but they don't know how to ask for it. They may not know how to terminate one if it's aversive. So say if we present something and we think that they might like it, but they actually don't. So then there's an adverse pairing right there, because they can't tell us, I don't like this, stop this. Or they might not express their interest appropriately. They might like something, but they're the way a typical child might express interest, a child with autism might not. And then they also have restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. So we know from the start, children on the spectrum, they don't like a lot of things, or they don't like to try a lot of things. So those are things that we have to keep in mind when we're teaching leisure skills.
We discussed that initiation of new activities as well. Sometimes there are the ability to initiate something new or different is a difficulty that they have that you have to work past and get through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes too, when you introduce new things as well, or kind of take something that they already like and then incorporate that into something that's similar but a new activity, you find out that they can expand that repertoire and they really enjoy something that you really didn't know they were going to enjoy. If so, a lot of times parents will ask, well, I know they like watching Thomas the Train, and I know they like looking at this one book. Why are we expanding upon that? And sometimes, to answer that is, if you don't try new things, we don't know if we like them, right? And that's kind of how it works. We have to expose them and kind of pair it with something they already enjoy, so that then that becomes reinforcing. And honestly, just kind of doing that pairing procedure opens up the door to things that they didn't know existed, and they might really end up liking many more things than if we just kind of let them alone and just to enjoy the two things that entertain. That it's not about changing their interest, expanding upon them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and those are the exact next points. Like expanding on current interests. So those were good examples. Like say your child really likes baseball cards or something. Maybe take them to a baseball game or watch a baseball game on TV and see if we could kind of, take that limited interest and just expand it beyond just introduce a whole bunch of new things. And then selecting novel activities that contain components of already preferred activity. That's great. Let's he likes to watch Thomas the Train, but let's introduce a Thomas puzzle. Let's try to introduce another video that has this, but it still has trains in it. So now we're taking something that's already enjoyable and adding more to it. And then Jenn also talked about, pairing a novel activity with something that's already enjoyable. So say your child likes to listen to music and just likes to sit there with the headphones. Why don't to get them to dance while they listen to music, or let's introduce a coloring sheet while they're listening to music. And that already preferred activity is being paired with something novel. I'm not going to say, I won't say aversive, just something novel, something new that we're introducing. So we want to decrease interfering behaviors. So if your child might be very resistant to even the introduction of something new might cause a behavior, or increase anxiety, or they might start to show frustration. So we don't want that. As behavior analysts, we don't want that. We want this to be enjoyable. Again, leisure skills equal enjoyment. So we want to start at a level that your child can handle to build tolerance to the introduction of new activities. So maybe 10 to 15 seconds, then return to the preferred activity. It doesn't have to be 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be 10 minutes. It could be just whatever your child could tolerate. And then for early learners or children who may engage in aggression or SIB, what you can also do is, we do this a lot at the center with our younger kiddos, is we keep a preferred item with them. And we don't remove it, because removal of preferred items often trigger a lot of behaviors. We can just block it, present the new activity engagement, and then immediately just get the preferred task right back. Whatever works for your child. You'll just have to, you'll have to look and assess what level they're at. And then we want to gradually increase the time away from preferred activities using prompts, reinforcement, and redirection when needed. So you'll see that 10 seconds will quickly turn into a minute. A minute will quickly turn into 2 minutes. And then, all of a sudden your child's now reading a book for 5 minutes, So it's very slow, and it's strategic, so that we don't turn this into an aversive event.
Sometimes talking about when you first start procedures like this, sometimes the parents don't get reinforced right away. There's like a lack of reinforcement for the parent, because it's kind of daunting. And so I think that's a role too. Like, you're like, oh man, this is never going to work, right? You get that defeat, like, okay, 10 seconds of this is never going to work. But Joanna, Danielle, and myself can tell you it does. It just kind of takes that commitment to the process. I have clients that had very restricted interests and now sets to build. It does work, and it's amazing to kind of see, and you just got to commit to it. So I'm just letting you know, don't get defeated at first, because at first you're not going to be reinforced, but the big picture, it does play out. So,
and even to that point about Legos, it sometimes also opens up doors to that they never would have had, or things that they may end up moving into a career with, because they now know, oh, hey, I can take these Legos and build great engineering skills. Or I like to take all the pieces of the car apart and put them back together, and maybe, it can lead up to future as well.
Good point.
Okay, so we're going to get started. So we have the behaviors are under wrap. Your child's okay with, getting shown some new activities or something different. A very easy strategy is just to create a work box or a busy box. So you can introduce those. You fill with master targets or things that they are good at. So your child might like inset puzzles or shape sorters or something. So we would just fill the box with things that are already preferred, and you can give them the box. 2 minutes. You're going to play with the activities inside this book or inside this box, and then you can get reinforcement afterwards. So it's easy, preferred, maybe not all preferred, but simple. That like again. I went ahead of myself. So then you want to gradually increase the time with the box and begin to intermix known and new activities. So once they're established with the box and they understand the contingency of the box, you can start to put in newer or novel activities, and maybe not even realize that something new is getting put into the box. So then another thing that you can then start to do is make it even more natural, where you can set up a little area in your home where you can have a leisure area for your child to be able to start to play the games that we taught them to play that were in that box. So again, it just kind of starts into something small and restricted, and then it gradually grows into something big and rather typical. And it's a very easy strategy. The other thing that you can do is do really basic first then charts and visual schedules. So when introducing a visual chart, you want to start small. If it's an early learner, do a visual schedule or something like that, you want to just do first then. So you do one leisure activity, and then you can go and do whatever you need to do. So then once first then is established, you can expand it into a visual schedule, both preferred and non-preferred activities. So then now that little picture in the corner, now you can make it long, and you can put as many activities as you want on there. You could intermix preferred and non-preferred. You can make it timed. You could do it self-terminating activities, basically anything you want, and they're just following the visual schedule and doing things that hopefully become enjoyable. So then you could also, to go beyond, if your child is able, you can teach them to set the timer on their own so that it's limited. I know iPad time is probably a huge reinforcer for a lot of our kids. I know my son, but if they just learn to set a timer on their own, it can self-terminate. You could also use choice boards. That's a visual choice board to allow your child to choose the next activity. So this is for non-compliance or kids that might have some behavior. If you build in choice, you see a lot more compliance. Okay, so now we're going to go on to ADL. So here's some strategies to teach ADLs. Typically with an activity of daily living, we start with the task analysis. We want to break the ADL into small steps. So if you see on the side, hand washing, you can make it, depending on the learner, you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, whatever works for you. So you want to assess your child's ability, what steps can be completed independently, what prompt level are the other steps at, what can't your child do at all. So you kind of want to sit back and see what they can and can't do, so that you know what to reinforce, you know where to start, you know what not to go over 100 times. And then you want to model the skill, prompt the steps, and reinforce, always reinforce. So one huge thing that we do with ADL, we use chaining. That's a very much behavior analyst term, but all that is just teaching your child one step at a time. Then once your child has mastered analysis, you move on to the next steps. Don't want a younger child or an early learner, we don't want to try to teach every step all at once. This can be challenging, especially for children with autism. To contact reinforcement. So again, we want to start small and we want to as quickly as possible so that we can build from there. A child with autism may also get hung up on one or two steps that are frustrating, breaking it down into a task, the task into small chunks and focusing on teaching one step at a time. You can teach your child a new skill with less frustration. So then there's different types of chaining. There's forward, there's backwards, and there's total task presentation. That's basically, you pick a chain based on your child and the task too. So a forward chain is you go forward, you reinforce, you teach the first step, and then you reinforce the first step, and then you keep moving forward. Chain is that you start at the last step. So you do also, say it's tying shoes, so you get everything up until the last knot, and then you teach just pulling that last knot. So everything else is completely prompted and hand over hand until you get to that last, moves through, and then you reinforce that, and then you do the last two steps. And then total task presentation is just what it sounds like. You just present the whole task and you say, okay, let's work on this together. It's a very, chaining is very effective in teaching ADLs. So. Some other things are a stimulus control procedure. Again, that sounds very, but all that means is that we're just showing our children when to complete the ADL so that they can be more independent. So see that my hands are dirty, I naturally will go and wash my hands. So we need to teach a child with autism that if they look down at their hands and they're dirty, they should wash their hands. This can be also done through a schedule, so reinforcing, maybe stating when you wake up in the morning, okay, we just woke up in the morning, now it's time to brush our teeth. So that we're giving that, so the control is not on us, it's on the child. So then now every morning when they wake up, they know my mom taught me that when it's the morning, I should brush my teeth, or right before I go to bed, I should brush my teeth. So that's all stimulus control procedures are. So just making sure that your child knows when they should be completing these activities. This promotes independence and decreases your child's reliance on an adult prompt to complete a task, because eventually we want those visual schedules gone, we want our prompts gone, and we want our kids just being independent. Because on a visual schedule is you provide a visual of each step of the task analysis, show that reinforcement is available once criteria is met, and then that's more supported than the stimulus control procedure, but it's very effective. I had a client last summer, we used to stick for getting his bathing suit on, drying off, and there was one other thing. All we did a visual schedule, we put it in his book bag, and he needed to do. He just took out his little schedule, looked at it, and followed all the steps. It was really, really neat. So again, independence. We didn't have to go into the bathroom with him. He just had a schedule, took it out, and did everything he needed to do.
I think that's a good point too. Like sometimes they surprise you with what they're capable of. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They started transferring, then the parents started transferring that to home. They used it for the shower, and it turned into a really neat thing. And all it was us just writing sentences on a piece of paper that he was able to just follow. And then video models. This is showing a video. So now everything that us was how we're teaching the leisure skills and teaching the ADL. So how do we get it to independence? So increasing and promoting independence requires prompts and interventions for both leisure skills. We know that the end goal for teaching ADLs and leisure skills is to ensure your child is completing the activities independently and generalizing the skills to other settings. So that you're going to have to kind of know at what point do I stop saying, go brush your teeth? At what point is my child going to know when I wake up in the morning and before I go to school, I have to brush my teeth? You know, that's if you have a behavior team or you have behavior analysts, that's something that you guys so this requires a gradual fading and removal of prompts, so the skill falls under naturally occurring contingencies. So when we say that, like, again, it just means that we're not supporting when this should be done. We're not using our visual schedules. We're not using activities just happening because we did a good job of teaching and then fading. So then again, then we can, you know, if we teach a leisure skill, we can know that instead of rocking in a chair all of recess, your child now is coloring with or without a peer, you know, doing something more age appropriate. And then another huge one, instead of having maybe your child has an aide at school or a nurse, and now you have if there's no independent living skill, a stranger is taking your child to the bathroom. You know, we don't want that. But now, since we taught the ADL, so the takeaway from this is we have to remember, by teaching your child these skills, you're giving them the tools they need to live the most productive and independent life they can at home, in school, and in the community.
Awesome.
Danielle, we do have one question right now. Hopefully, I think people might have some more. But the first question is, when your child masters a particular skill and you move on, what do you do when they regress a little bit? It's overwhelming to do it all the time.
You know, you have to just take a couple steps back. Is I've never worked with a child typical or, you know, or impacted by autism that hasn't regressed at some point. And typically if there is, it's quicker to get the skill back. Just don't give up, you know, go back, take 2 steps back, reteach, and move on. And they already mastered it. Honestly, it doesn't take as long to reteach than the initial teaching.
And I think if it's something that's really posing to be difficult, then maybe you have to look at how you're breaking it down, whether or not it's too much of a task before the child's getting reinforcement, those kinds of things that we touched upon before. You know, if it's aversive, maybe it's something you have to move away from. Or sometimes things will become aversive, we don't really mean for them to, but we're maybe pushing too hard or too fast and they become aversive. And sometimes it's important to just take a break from that and move on to something else, and then reintroduce that back again if you feel like it was something that you think that they would like.
Okay. Another question, what do you do when your child reacts to the very same situation differently depending on the environment that they're in?
That's part of the generalization. We have to teach to all different environments. And then, you know, I would, consistency is key. I mean, whatever you're doing in one environment, you should carry over and do it in the next and teach it in the other environment, so that there's some sort of generalization. And I mean, that's definitely something, you know, if you don't have a behavior team, but talking to the school, because then there's 2 settings. And as the more and more settings you teach to, the easier it gets. You know, you'll see that there might not be so much resistance in a new setting after it's taught in 2 or 3 different settings.
Sometimes with ADLs, parents will say also, oh, well, you know what, they do that for me, but then in school they're not doing it at all. And it's so hard from a behavioral analyst standpoint to say, well, that's not good enough. But the reason we say that's not good enough is because, hey, we want them to be doing this in every environment with other people, right? So that's one thing I hear is, well, they do this for me, we don't need to practice that. But then, you know, if the behavior technician or their RBT or the teacher's asking them to do that, and then the hand washing isn't on point and they're relying completely on still shape up, that's awesome that they're doing it for you. So let's use that and just kind of generalize it to other people or other environments. So that's another thing that sometimes comes up, but it's important that everyone, like with that question saying, you know, if it's not, what do you do if in one environment they're fine and in another they're not? Well, we have to do it across all environments so that doesn't keep kind of happening.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes children get stuck in, oh, I do this at home and I do that at school, and they're just kind of, and so just breaking that pattern for them opens it back up,
Yeah.
you know, so that they're able to do it everywhere. And sometimes you have to just get over that little hurdle of like, it's okay that we do this at school, you know, it's okay, and you're fine, and here we go, and we're just going to do this one task, you know. So then that again goes back to breaking it down and adding reinforcement and kind of working to develop the skill wherever you are.
Right. Any other questions? Just in case anyone didn't hear me in the beginning, if you have a question, you could type it into the chat box, and I'm happy to answer. I'm happy to ask the questions so they can give you your answers. We'll just try to give it another minute, make sure we don't have anyone else typing. Well, I think that this was really helpful, you know, like you were saying about the different settings. I said it's you know, really hard to think about moving across those settings, I think, for some families. So I think that that was really informative. We also, later this month, we have another webinar with an occupational therapist that's going to talk about, her webinar is called Hands Off That iPad, and trying to introduce some other leisure skills. So I think that one will go hand in hand with what you guys have been talking about today. So I am not seeing any more questions, but you know, as always, anyone that's out there watching, if you do have any questions after you've thought about it a little bit, you can feel free to contact us at the Autism Center, or certainly reach out to Beyond Behavior to answer any of your questions that you may have about your children. And Danielle, Joanna, and Jen, I thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise with us. As always, it's just so informative and helpful to our families, always, but especially, you know, during this time when, you know, kiddos are spending a lot more time at home than they typically are. So we really appreciate your information. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
very
us.
much.
All right, I'm going to end.